great. It is good. It is perfect. Oh, your presence. Oh, your presence. It is great. It is good. It is holy. Oh, your presence. Oh, your presence. I can feel it. I can feel it. Oh, your mercy. Oh, your mercy. It is great. It is good. It is perfect. Oh, your presence. Oh, your presence. It is great. It is good. It is holy. Oh, your presence. Oh, your presence. And I know in my body you reside. And I know I am breathing in your life. And I know I am seeing through your eyes. And I know that your heart is beating mine. I can feel it. I can feel it. Oh, your love. Oh, your love. I can feel it. I can feel it. Oh, your love. Oh, your love.
Thank you, Darlene. That was beautiful. And James and Eric, who I didn't tell anything to, thank you. And musicians, yay. So Stoney gave me a note when we walked out of church last week, and he said, let's try it this way. And it's in my iPad note, and I thought it was a great idea, but I didn't think about it until we'd already started. So thank you for being so flexible, and thank you guys for being so flexible. It means you have a lot of trust that we're going to get to the end somehow. There was a minister who said, does anybody have a prayer request? How may we pray for you? And people came up and he would pray. And Leroy came up. And the minister was really kind of surprised because Leroy had never come up before. And he said, Leroy, how can I pray with you? And Leroy said, pray for my hearing. And the minister prayed like he had never prayed before. And about the time he'd get through praying, he'd have a new inspiration. And he'd pray some more. And when he got through, he said, Leroy, how's your hearing? And Leroy looked at him and says, well, I don't know yet. It's not till next Wednesday. We have to have a moment of humor because our subject matter is sometimes, some people might think some of our subject matter gets heavy. And today we're going to continue talking about being the flow of God's good. And there's a difference between being in the flow and actually being the flow of God's good. And that's our goal. We want to be the flow of God's good. We want God's flow to just be part of us, for us to be a part of it, for us to be that flow of good. And as I started out, I said that there were 8 spiritual principles that we were going to talk about, that if you practice those principles, here's the kicker word, simultaneously. You begin to be that flow. And so we talked about what some people think is the hardest one of the practice, which is spiritual giving, the first week. We talked about being on purpose, and that each of us has a combined purpose, and that combined purpose is to know God and to be God, and that each of us has an individual purpose. And then last week we talked about letting go and letting God. And so today we're talking about forgiveness. Now we all know we need to do forgiveness, right? Yeah, it's a kind of common thing. We got to do forgiveness. But when somebody's done somebody wrong, when somebody's done us wrong, it's pretty hard to do, isn't it? When we talk about forgiveness, I always say, but you don't know what they did. They did this and this and this and this and this. And they say, I have a right to not forgive. And you're right. You have the right not to forgive. But you also have the right to forgive. And the spiritual truth is that if you don't forgive or can't forgive, you cannot be the flow of God's good. It's just like we can't go north and we can't go south, east and west, at the same time. We can't be the flow of God's good if we're holding on to resentment, bitterness, anger. So this morning I have 3 tiers of forgiveness. And the first tier of forgiveness is that we have to stop blaming. We can't blame anyone. Oh my gosh. It can't be their fault I feel this way. Oh my gosh. Of course, we only teach that in every other class we have, but we have to take responsibility for us, because the trick is, if we blame them, we can't get better until they change. And I've spent a whole lot of my life trying to want Gerald to change. It hadn't worked. But when I take responsibility for my feelings and for myself and for my life, it doesn't matter if they change. The point gets to, you gonna put up with it or not? Now, it does not mean we have to take abuse, and I'm not ever saying that. But can't take blame. So the affirmation I have for you this morning is, I am willing to take full responsibility for my life and its outcome. Just think about that for a second as I say it again. I take full responsibility for my life and its outcome. Can you say that? I take full responsibility for my life and its outcome. Yeah. Blame and responsibility are very different. It's the first tier to forgiveness. Scripturally, how do we know that's true? What did Jesus tell us? If we have anything between us and our brother before we go to the altar in prayer, we go first and make it right with our brother. As long as I'm blaming my brother, I can never make it right. And my brother will always be between me and God. But the men responsible, oh, then I cease keeping my brother between me and God. Catherine Ponder, the second tier. Catherine Ponder says to forgive means to give up. And so guess what we might have to give up? We might have to give up our story. What would life be like without our story? Peaceful. Do you have your favorite story? Can you think about what your favorite story is? For years, my favorite story has been, my father was an alcoholic. What is your favorite story? We have to give up that story. This is from Edwene Gaines' book, The 4 Spiritual Laws of Prosperity, and it's her story. And she says that the kind of forgiveness I'm talking about can be difficult to swallow when you think about the truly terrible things that people do. For example, you might ask, what about sexual abuse of a child? How can a person be asked to forgive something as terrible as that? And Edwene Gaines says, I myself was a victim of childhood sexual abuse, so I know full well the devastation that kind of betrayal can cause in a person's life. I had a particularly difficult time with the effect it had on my self-esteem, and for many years I played the victim. I will be eternally grateful for a teacher who one day abruptly called me on my act. As I once again began to tell my tale of woe, as she began to tell her story, he stopped her, and this is what he said. Listen, Toots, this victim stuff has gone far enough. It's really a drag, and it's boring the tears out of the rest of us. She says, I was shocked. Now, for those of you who remember Edwene Gaines, that woman of power, you can imagine somebody saying, Toots, get rid of the story. He had not given me the poor baby response that she expected. She said, as I gasped, he continued, in order to heal this childhood trauma, what you've got to do is create a new story around it. Okay, here's your new story. Try this one on and see if it works. You came onto this planet to be a woman of power. How many of us have heard Edwene Gaines stand up here and the first thing she says is, I am a woman of power. You came onto this planet to be a woman of power. Your soul chose this pathway to be a woman of power. And because you chose it, you also chose to take initiation in the misuse of power at a very young age. During this initiation, you learned what it is, what it feels like when power is misused. And it is horrible. Therefore, it is now safe for you to be a woman of power in the world because you know now that you will never misuse or abuse this power. And in this process, you have gained the most valuable of all spiritual gifts, an understanding heart. Edwene continues, my world reeled from this and cracked open a bit. It didn't happen overnight, but little by little, one day at a time, I began to embrace this wonderful new story, a saga that completely reordered my personal history. It made me feel powerful rather than helpless. It allowed me to give up the role of victim. And so after I'd read that, and then she's been here a couple of times since I've read that, and then I've gotten up and seen her say, I'm a woman of power. And I can understand how rewriting that story reordered her life. So you and I have a story, and maybe this afternoon you too will want to go home and figure out what is your new story. What is your new story? I grew up poor. I learned at a young age how to be a steward of money. What's some other stories? My parents didn't love me. I learned how important it is to be a person that loves unconditionally. Can you get the drift? Can you see the correlation that might be for you in your life? So the first tier is we give up blame. Second tier, we give up our story. Third tier, we have to see things from the other person's perspective. For those of you who were here for Be Peace training, and we identified our own feelings and needs, and we guessed the feelings and needs of the other person, that's looking at it from another's perspective. We had a speaker here, Greg Bear. I don't know if any of you remember him, but he told a story. He said, or he gave an example about forgiveness. He says, if you're sitting on your vacation, you're sitting, poolside at your table, you're having a drink, and you're just comfortable, and you've got this beautiful dress on, or you're all dressed up, and all of a sudden somebody splashes you. What do you start thinking? How do you start reacting? And they splash you again and again, and you get this feeling inside, they're splashing my clothes. Don't they see how dressed up I am? And you get up and walk over there, and you're going to say, and you look and you see that it's somebody drowning, and they're trying to save themselves. All of a sudden, your perspective changes, doesn't it? It no longer matters that your slacks or your dress or whatever got wet. You had a change in perspective. There's a teacher that I've read about, Robert McDonald, and he talks about the telos. I think telos is how I think you say it. Telos is a word that goes back to Aristotle, and it means the ultimate end, the goal of all goals. I might say that my telos is to know God and be God. But Robert McDonald teaches this, that telos in most every situation is that I want to be happy. He says what happens is we go out in this world and somebody does something and we react because we're not happy and we're upset with them. He said what happens is we lose sight of the fact that what is it that they want? To be happy. And so destructive behavior never works. Bad behavior never works. But when we see it, we have this choice of reacting or stepping back and feeling a sense of compassion, because we can see that their strategy is never going to work. And what do they want? To be happy. And they're doing things to make what they think will make them happy. And will it work? No. And can you think of any time that you've ever done anything that might have been destructive? Mm-hmm. You know, I think our addictions get us there. We get into addiction there. When I think a glass of wine will make me happy. When I think that brownie is going to make me happy. It has no long-lasting effect. So when I see someone else adopting that behavior, are those behaviors that I don't want to adopt, I have the choice. I can jump up and down, and I may do that. I may stomp my feet. Now, I really might stomp my feet and say, don't do that. But if I can step back and recognize that they are doing what they think will make them happy. And the place where I get to practice that the most is with my grandchildren. Do they make decisions that are the best decisions? But when I can stop and think, they're making the decision that they think will make them happy, I can have a little more possibility of keeping my mouth shut. The other thing is, after time, I recognize that even though I have learned that lesson, they can't learn it because I learned it. Sometimes they have to learn it for themselves. So it's very important for us to keep that in mind, because we're always going to be confronted with people doing things that we would say are not kind, correct, right, or otherwise. If we can remember that that is their strategy to be happy, and it's not likely to work, even though they think it does in the moment, we can have a little more compassion. So there are 3 tiers. Not to blame, not to let go of our story, and to look at look from other person's perspective. Even knowing this intellectually, forgiveness still is one of those really hard things to do. I believe it's probably more difficult than tithing sometimes. In fact, I think there are people who say, well, I put my money in the plate, that ought to be enough. When you start talking about forgiving them, that's meddling. And I don't know how many times I've heard somebody say to me, I'll forgive them when I feel better about it. You might feel better if you forgive. How many times are we supposed to forgive? 70 times 7. And what does it mean? Forever. for as long as it takes. 7 is a number of completion. And that's like when they say 70 times 7, that means whatever it takes till it's complete. So if someone has done something, or there's something that's happened in your life that you can't let go of, 70 times 7. Yes, you may forgive them and let it go and change your story, and tomorrow it'll come right back up. And what do you have to do again? Forgive. You have to let go. You have to go through the steps. I'm not blaming them. I'm taking responsibility for my life. I'm changing my story. I'm looking at how from their perspective. I'm knowing that they just did that because that's what they thought would make them happy. Final thing I'm going to say about forgiveness is there is a plus. I think your thing said the 3 tiers of forgiveness plus. The plus is when you can learn to be thankful for the experience. When you can look at the experience and see the gift. Okay, who had the fight in the desert with the angel? That was Jacob, wasn't it? And Jacob said he didn't want to let go until he got the gift. So whatever that is, that story is, that thing that happened in your life, I'm really asking you to go through these steps. I'm asking you to wrestle with it until you can see the gift that has for you. Maybe it's an understanding heart. Maybe it's the fact that you too don't know that you how to deal with power. Maybe it's that lets you be a better parent. This week, we relinquish all blame. We take full responsibility for our lives. We give up the story and we reframe it. We see the situation from the perspective of the guilty party, whether that be ourselves or someone else. That's something I didn't mention, is we should not blame ourselves. We should forgive ourselves. We should look back at all those things that we should have done, could have done. We look back and know at that moment, even though that was not an appropriate strategy, it was the strategy we thought would make us happy at the time. We did the best we could at the time. And finally, we become grateful for the experience, and we love it, and we bless it. And so I'm going to invite you now, if you have a situation in your life where you need to do some forgiveness, just let that come to your mind. And for those of you who don't, you can just take a little nap. That won't be many of us. We just close our eyes and we let that situation or that person come forward in our mind. I love you and I bless you. I let you go. I love you and I bless you and I want the very best for you. And I let it go. I love you, I bless you, and I want you to have your heart's desire. And I let it go. All that has offended me, I forgive. Within and without, I forgive. Things past, things present, things future, I forgive. I forgive everything or everybody of the past or present that can possibly be forgiven. I positively forgive everyone. They are free and I am free too. All thoughts are cleared up between us now and forever. I positively forgive myself. Through this forgiveness, I set myself free. I dissolve in my own mind any idea that my own can be withheld from me. No person, thing, or event can keep from me that which the universe has for me now. That which seems to have worked against me in the past now helps and supports me in the present. I bless those persons, things, and events that seem to have hurt me. I bless the failures to seem to have burdened me. I give thanks that a blessing is now coming out of everything. And now I live and move and have my being as the flow of God's great good. And so it is. Amen.